General Hospital will reveal Drew had recently found himself entangled in increasingly frequent interactions with Siwell, a man whose ambitions knew no bounds. Siwell was not just a schemer, he was a man with a ruthless vision, determined to seize control of Port Charles at any cost. In his growing frustration and resentment toward Jason and Sonny, Drew made a dangerous pact with Siwell, completely oblivious to the depths of his associate's cruelty. Drew saw an opportunity, one that would allow him to strike back at those who had overshadowed him for far too long. But what he failed to realize was that Siwell was far more sinister than he had let on. For Siwell, Drew was nothing more than a pawn in a grander scheme, a disposable tool in his relentless pursuit of dominance. His true objective was not just to weaken Jason and Sonny, it was to eradicate them entirely, ensuring that he alone held the power in Port Charles's underworld. Drew, blinded by his own sense of betrayal and thirst for vengeance, allowed himself to be pulled into this treacherous game. He believed he was simply outmaneuvering two men he had grown to despise, but he was unaware of the true extent of Siwell's depravity. Siwell's promises were nothing more than well-crafted illusions, designed to manipulate Drew into compliance. What Drew had thought was merely a calculated move against Jason and Sonny turned out to be something far more sinister. Siwell had no intention of merely undermining them, he wanted them dead. But Drew, despite his anger, had never considered taking things that far. He had wanted to shake their foundations, to make them suffer as he had, but murder was a line he was unwilling to cross. By the time Drew realized the extent of what he had become involved in, it was already too late. When Drew finally grasped the full extent of Siwell's true intentions, a cold wave of fear crashed over him. He had harbored resentment toward Jason and Sonny, but despite his anger, he had never wanted them dead. The realization that he had aligned himself with a man capable of such ruthless brutality made his blood run cold. He needed to back out, to extricate himself from this dangerous alliance before it was too late. But Siwell had no intention of letting him go so easily. Drew's hesitation was a betrayal in Siwell's eyes. The crime lord had invested too much in this plan to allow sentimentality or second thoughts to ruin it. Knowing that Drew's loyalty was wavering, Siwell resorted to the most despicable act imaginable. He kidnapped Scout, Drew's innocent, young daughter, using her as leverage to force Drew into submission. In Siwell's hands, Scout was nothing more than a bargaining chip, a tool to ensure Drew's compliance, no matter the cost. Terrified and alone, Scout found herself trapped in the clutches of ruthless men, her tiny body trembling with fear as she sobbed uncontrollably. She screamed for her father, for her mother, her desperate cries filling the darkened space where she was being held. But there was no one to hear her. No one to rescue her. The walls around her were indifferent to her suffering, the men guarding her devoid of mercy. She was just a child, yet she had been dragged into the violent world her father had tried so hard to shield her from. Drew was overcome with a gut-wrenching sense of horror. He had made a mistake, a catastrophic, irreversible mistake. In his misguided pursuit of vengeance, he had condemned his own daughter to the clutches of a monster. He had been so blinded by his hatred, by his need to strike back at Jason and Sonny, that he had failed to see the true danger lurking beneath Siwell's calculated demeanor. And now, his daughter, the most precious thing in his life, was paying the price for his recklessness. Siwell had left him no choice. There was no escape, no way to walk away unscathed. Drew had tried to play a game he was never prepared for, and now, the stakes had risen to an unbearable level. If he wanted his daughter back, if he wanted to undo the nightmare he had created, he would have to find a way to outmaneuver Siwell, before it was too late. Desperate and out of options, Drew swallowed his pride and sought out the one man he had once considered his enemy, Sonny. There was no more room for arrogance, no more room for grudges. The weight of his mistakes bore down on him, and with his daughter's life hanging in the balance, he did something he never thought he would do. He dropped to his knees before Sonny, his voice shaking as he confessed everything. Every betrayal, every reckless decision, every misguided step that had led to this moment. He laid bare the entire scheme Siwell had orchestrated, exposing the ruthless mastermind's true intentions. Drew's voice cracked as he begged for help, his desperation leaving no room for dignity. He was not a man seeking redemption, he was a father fighting for his child's life. Tears burned in his eyes as he admitted the truth. He had let his anger cloud his judgment, and now his daughter was paying the price. He did not expect Sonny to forgive him, nor did he deserve it. All he could do was pray that, for Scout's sake, Sonny would not turn him away. Sonny stood there in silence, his expression unreadable. There was fury in his eyes, the weight of Drew's betrayal evident in the tight clench of his jaw. Drew had aligned himself with a monster, a man who wanted Sonny and Jason dead. He had become a pawn in a game that could have destroyed them all. But none of that mattered now. Not when an innocent child was being held captive. Not when Scout, scared, helpless, and alone, was suffering because of the choices her father had made. Sonny was a lot of things, ruthless, calculating, dangerous. But he was also a father. And if there was one thing he understood above all else, it was that no child should ever have to endure the horrors of this world because of the mistakes of their parents. The anger burning inside him could wait. Revenge could wait. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered, getting Scout back safely. He let out a slow breath before meeting Drew's desperate gaze. Against his better judgment, against every instinct telling him not to trust the man who had turned against him, Sonny made his decision. He would help Drew. Not for him, but for Scout. Because no matter what had transpired between them, no matter how deep the betrayal ran, a child's life was worth more than their feud. Steeling himself for the battle ahead, Sonny extended his hand, pulling Drew back to his feet. We end this. We take Siwell down. And we get your daughter back. The war had begun. And this time, there would be no mercy. While Drew was grappling with the greatest fear of his life, the other children of Port Charles were not faring much better. At General Hospital, young lives were being shaped by pain, loss, and revelations far beyond their years. Gio was on the brink of a devastating discovery, the realization that his entire existence had been built on a lie. The truth, once revealed, would shake him to his core, leaving him to question everything he had ever known. Aiden, on the other hand, was facing the return of a father he had long believed was gone forever. A ghost from his past had suddenly reappeared, bringing with it a storm of emotions, confusion, anger, and perhaps a flicker of hope. But after so many years of absence, could this man ever truly be a father to him again? Or was his return just another cruel twist in Aiden's life? Meanwhile, Avery found herself trapped in a war that was never hers to fight. Her parents, locked in an endless battle of power and resentment, pulled her in opposite directions, using her as both a shield and a weapon. She loved them both, yet she was forced to witness the worst of them, the rage, the manipulation, the struggle for dominance. She had no voice in their conflict, yet she suffered the most. In the world of adults, where power, ambition, and revenge dictated every move, it was always the children who paid the heaviest price. Their innocence was stolen, their sense of security shattered, and their futures forever altered by choices they never made. And as Drew fought desperately to save Scout from the nightmare he had helped create, the question remained, how many more children in Port Charles would be forced to endure the same fate before the cycle of pain was finally broken? Scout, the poor little girl, had become the most tragic victim of this escalating war. While her brothers, Danny and Rocco, were shielded by responsible fathers who worked tirelessly to protect them, Scout had been thrust into a deadly game orchestrated by the very man meant to keep her safe, her own father. She was too young to understand the politics of power and betrayal, too innocent to comprehend why she had been taken from the warmth of her home and into the clutches of monsters. The world she knew, the security she had always trusted, had been ripped away in an instant. Drew, desperate to right his wrongs, had now wagered his own life in an attempt to rescue his daughter. Every move he made, every decision he took, carried the weight of her survival. But was he already too late? Had he condemned his child to a fate he could no longer undo? He had once thought himself in control, a man navigating his own path, but now he realized he had been nothing more than a pawn, played by Siwell, manipulated into a war he never truly understood. Now, it was no longer just about his redemption. It was about saving his daughter before the darkness consumed them both. Meanwhile, Sonny and Jason stood on the front lines of the coming battle, preparing to face a threat unlike any they had encountered before. They had spent years fighting enemies, navigating the treacherous world of power and crime, but Siwell was different. He was not merely a rival, he was a man with no limits, no code, no loyalty to anything but his own thirst for domination. If they failed to stop him, Port Charles itself could fall into his grip, and the blood spilled would not end with Scout. The war had begun, and the stakes had never been higher. No one could predict how this would end. But one thing was certain, before it was over, lives would be changed forever. Although Sonny had agreed to help Drew rescue Scout, his decision was not driven by forgiveness but by necessity. The life of an innocent child was at stake, and regardless of his personal feelings toward Drew, Sonny could not allow Scout to suffer because of her father's reckless choices. However, beneath the calculated exterior he maintained, fury burned deep within him. Drew's betrayal ran far deeper than his alliance with Siwell, and Sonny had already decided, Drew would pay for what he had done. Drew had crossed a line that could never be undone. His actions had not only endangered Jason, but he had also inflicted unimaginable pain on Michael. Sleeping with Willow, Michael's wife, had been the ultimate act of betrayal. It was not just a meaningless indiscretion, it was a deliberate choice that shattered Michael's trust and left him drowning in the aftermath of that betrayal. Michael had always been fiercely loyal to his family, had fought to uphold the values Sonny had instilled in him, and yet Drew had selfishly dismantled everything in a single moment. The damage had already been done, leaving Michael struggling with wounds that no apology could ever mend. Beyond that, Drew had made a choice that was even more unforgivable. In his desperation to assert himself, to exact some misguided form of vengeance, he had gambled with Jason's life. Jason, a man who had stood beside Sonny for years, who had sacrificed over and over again for the sake of those he loved, had been reduced to nothing more than a pawn in Drew's dangerous game. Drew had placed Jason in the hands of Siwell, a man with no honor, no sense of restraint, a man who would not hesitate to take his life if it served his own interests. It had been a calculated risk, one that Drew had taken without any regard for the cost. Sonny could not and would not overlook what had been done. His empire had been built on loyalty, on an unwavering code that dictated family came before all else. Drew had disregarded that entirely. He had allowed his resentment, his bitterness, and his own personal grievances to cloud his judgment, leading him to betray the very people who had once stood beside him. That was something Sonny would never forget. Once Scout was safe, Sonny made sure Drew understood the full weight of his actions. There were no words of comfort, no reassurances that things could ever return to what they once were. Drew had made his choices, and now he would have to live with the consequences. Sonny did not need to raise his voice, nor did he need to threaten. His mere presence, the cold finality in his demeanor, was enough to make it clear. There would be no easy way out of this. Drew had hurt Michael, had risked Jason's life, had aligned himself with a man who sought to dismantle everything Sonny had built. That was not something that could be erased with regret. Actions had consequences, and Sonny would ensure that Drew faced every single one of them. Whatever punishment awaited him, it would not be swift, nor would it be merciful. Sonny had made his decision, and in his world, betrayal always came with a cost. Drew was about to learn just how steep that price would be.